What's shaking BookTube? My name's Cam and I'm here today with a book review. There's two things you're going to notice pretty quickly if you watch a lot of my videos. The first one is that this particular book review is not a drunk book review. It's not booktuber impressions. There's no kind of gag with this book review. And there's a really good reason for that. The reason is that it's not just the intense themes of the book I'll be reviewing, but also the fact those intense themes are rooted in stuff that's really happened and stuff that was very real to a lot of people. Maybe even some ancestors of people who might be watching this video. So it didn't feel entirely appropriate. It just didn't feel right to do gags and jokes with this book review. That's not to say I'm not going to try and make this entertaining. I realize no matter how grim a book is, no matter how rooted in real things it is, you can still be entertaining. So I will be trying to do that. I'll just be trying to do it as respectfully as possible. The second thing is, yep, I've got my reading glasses on. That's because I've got a notebook here that I'm going to be referencing a lot for this book. Anyway, the book is Once. Let's get to chatting. Roll the intro. So Once is the first book in I believe it's 5-book series by Gleitzman. He was a very well-known author. Basically, this is set during 1942, which is around the time of the Nazi occupation of Poland, and that's the central theme of this book. So I'm sure you can instantly understand what I meant when I was talking about being respectful at the start of the video. My experiences with Gleitzman have always been kids' books and really wacky and quirky books. And although this one is sold as a middle-aged to children's book, I have to say straight up, I don't think this would be... I wouldn't recommend this to kids, at least as a first Holocaust reading, just because it's pretty intense. The thing is, it was really hard to separate my views on the writing itself from how well the story was told, just because of those themes. And normally that's not really an issue for me because I'm a big advocate of critical reading, and I don't think that you need to take yourself out of the story or enjoy it less to read critically. I talk all about that in another video I'll put up there about critical reading, but I tried to be critical of this book, and to a most degree I was, but I just genuinely didn't find that many faults. If I was to say I found any cons about Once, I think it would mostly be that a lot of the dialogue was extremely repetitive in instances where it didn't need to be repetitive, and that did irritate me to a certain extent. I think it was intentional by Morris that he was being repetitive in those bits of dialogue, but honestly I don't think it was really all that necessary. For example, one of the characters, Zelda, when she's talking to the main character Felix, says a lot, "Don't you know anything?" And it just... I get she's a little kid, but it's just used a bit too much. Another thing is that this story centralizes or focuses on the protagonist Felix, who is about 9-10 years old, obviously experiencing firsthand the Nazi occupation of Poland, and he's just naive in so many instances. And it's hard to say this is a con because this is also one of the pros, the fact that this isn't a story about a kid told from an adult's perspective. Well, technically it is, but you're experiencing this series of events through a child's eyes. That's a massive pro for me. It's just, Morris has done a fantastic job of getting the naivety of a child through this story. And I mean, it did irritate me at times, but Felix was never stupid. He was just naive and possibly in denial at a lot of points, and that's very genuine. It added to how genuine the story was. As for the story itself, I honestly would not recommend reading this if you aren't a fan of feeling melancholy, because as soon as I finished, and I finished pretty quickly, it's a very short book, it's only about 150 pages, and it's surprisingly very, very fast-paced. That's another big pro here, is that the pacing was so well done. While still being respectful and genuine to the occurrences during this time, the pacing it always kept you intrigued and interested and emotionally attached. You wanted to know that the characters were going to be okay going forward. And you as the reader know that that's not really a guaranteed thing. That's not a promise that all of these characters you're growing attached to are going to be okay because of the stuff that was going on at the time. But that was one of the most endearing things about the book. If I was to summarize my feelings on this book in any way, it would be that, okay, so I'll start by saying I gave the book 5 stars. And again, that was a hard thing to do just because I had to try and separate my views on the writing from my views on the events that really did happen, that were referenced in this book. But 5 stars actually ended up feeling pretty fair. Without actively going through every sentence looking for errors, nothing popped out to me as a bad form of writing. All of the writing was done very, very well and very expertly, as most Morris G stories are. But if that didn't earn the 5 stars, the thing that did is just how much this introduces you to look at the events of World War II from a new perspective. I'm sure you and myself, we all know the stuff that happened and the horrible events that took place during the Holocaust. But this book doesn't just give you a look from the outside. It takes you right through the middle of it, through a child's eyes. And it's so heartbreaking. It's one of the saddest things I've read. And not just because sad stuff happens, but because people experienced this. Real people. And this book makes you think, how would I have dealt with that? It makes you put yourself in the shoes of the people who are going through stuff like the Jewish people were going through during the Holocaust, and just realizing how terrifying that would have been, how helpless you could be. Another good thing about this book is it doesn't just paint the Nazis as the villains, it paints a series of circumstances as the villains as well, like the lack of food, which admittedly was part and parcel of the Nazi occupation, but not just the Nazis, but also all of the people that no one really thinks of who were not Nazis themselves, but in support of the Nazi regime. For example, there's bits in the book where the Jews are being marched through the streets, and there's just people who live there standing on the sidelines just yelling abuse at them, and just realizing that again is something else that really took place. And the villains weren't always the ones wearing the armbands. It's just, this is an extremely emotionally taxing book, but is something I'll recommend to the moon and back. I will definitely be continuing with the series, and I'm, again, glad that it's such a short story because it was so emotionally draining. I definitely need a light read after this. I was going to read Waiting for Doggo, but I feel like I'm just going to be tearing myself up again in a completely different way, of course. Another thing about the book that kind of reels you into the realism of it is the views people had at the time on Adolf Hitler, especially the children. You see, a lot of the children were kind of raised or taught during that time to believe that Adolf Hitler was, a saint and a godsend and was going to bring them out of this depression. And seeing Felix, the main character, connect the dots between the Nazis who were making everything worse and the person that he's been praying to for help is, again, heartbreaking, but very, very realistic. Well, yeah, anyway, I know this review was probably one of the most boring book reviews I've ever done, but I at least hope it was respectful and gave you as much of an insight as you need on the book once. I'm not really sure what else to say. It's left me in such a state of melancholy, wow. It's opened my eyes in a way that I don't think I've ever read a book. I usually avoid books based in real traumatic events like that, but after finally exposing myself to it, I'm so thankful. That's another reason the book deserves 5 stars. It's just being introduced to these stories in a whole new way. It's just, yeah. As always, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, despite how somber it is. Check out my social media links below. If you aren't already, join the Wolfpack and subscribe. And if you are in the Wolfpack, I'll see you in the next video. Catch ya.